Okay, so the next thing is you understand kind of the conceptual group and information about what that conceptual group is. You understand kind of each of the individual lists and some information about that list, and you understand the values and the information about that values. Back up to the list level, it is helpful, particularly if you're going to do integration and automation or synchronization on this, to understand technical details for where this list lives. So where does this list live in the particular data system that we're pulling it from? So there's really sort of two main ways that you can do this, and there's others, but this in our system, we give you sort of two ways to do it, and then there's a long tail of other kind of ways. But the two main ways is to say, in this particular data system, the set of code values live in a particular table. So if your data system that you have has a dedicated table or some sort of repository for the set of code values that you can edit in that system, and it'll update that table, then that's great. So you can define like, oh, which schema and table does that live in? And then for all of the specific bits of information you're going to track, say, all right, well, what in that table, what column in that table represents the code? What column in that table represents the description, right? And that's kind of the minimum required fields that you want to track on that. But then you might say, if there is a key that's different than the code, you could say what column tracks that. If there is a more detailed description, which I'm very unlikely to find, but if there is, you can say what column represents that. If you're able to, if your data system supports some sort of statuses for values, you can pull in the status and the date, and maybe there's a little translation you have to do there. And if there are roll-up values that you can pull somehow, you can pull that in as well to the different multiple roll-up values. But to document sort of where this lives and how you can find this out. Now, sometimes there's not a dedicated table there, and sometimes it's something that you have to query. So you could have a query where you're saying, select from this thing or select unique from this table and bring back those values for the, returning the unique set of codes with the description and all of that. So you can do this with a query way if you want to. So if someone comes and says, hey, I want to understand what are the current set of values here and the information about that value that lives in that data system. That's the purpose of this, is to document that. You can document it for table schema or query. Now there are other things depending on the data source. So particularly certain like enumerated values, maybe you're pulling from an API spec where there's like a Swagger definition, which is a metadata publishing format for web service APIs, and in that Swagger there's a markup for enumerated values. Like that may be where you're pulling from. Or there's some systems where they store things like data entry valid values lists and things like that at the application level or in some sort of other separate table. If you can identify those sources, it'd be good to document that information here, whether or not you can integrate that or not, just to know this is where this lives and how you get access to it. Now the next thing, and this is really maybe a little bit specific to the cookbook or tools like it, is that if you are going to set this up and you actually want to, and that tool supports the ability to have an automated synchronization, you can say, hey, I've identified where this lives. I want to turn this on, and I want to know, like, I want it to be synchronized at this frequency. Right. Now, some tools work a little bit different. Like when you actually can point it at a data system, and it'll kind of do a discovery and pull and automate, automatically creating all the reference data values and pulling that in, and that is okay. Like if that's what you want to do. My one concern with that approach is that it misses a certain curation activity. First of all, it brings in a lot of noise that you probably don't care about for a lot of those values. And secondly, it doesn't always take into consideration this conceptual grouping that you have. So if you just randomly auto-generate lists from various databases based on things that are tagged as reference data, things that are, I don't know, that are foreign keys or whatever, you're going to need to do some curation to kind of bring them together and talk about, purpose and conceptual connections between those things. One thing that we do, or a way to approach this too, is like if you're looking at a particular data model item, deciding to say, hey, I want to take this thing that I found at the database level, like I'm looking at a particular table or a particular field that's pointing to a reference data list, and say, oh, I should make a list out of that. Having something in a tool that lets you create that list is useful too, to say, I want to create the list, but when you do that, you make a decision about, I'm connecting it to a conceptual list, or I'm going to build a new conceptual grouping, or how do I want to to do that. But just gives you a little bit of information. So that's another bit of details there. So here's sort of an example in our system how you would set up like, the code and the description and things for a particular set of values. So if you can, even if you're tracking this in your own spreadsheets or something to keep track of that is helpful.